Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. So, Washington State is a land of dramatic contrast. Its landscape includes isolated coastlines, ancient evergreen forest, volcanic mountains, deep river valleys, military installations, and vast wilderness areas where, a person can travel for miles encountering another human being. It's also a region with a long and disturbing history of unexplained activity. Now, witnesses have reported strange lights moving over mountains and forests, enormous unidentified creatures gliding silently through the night, translucent humanoids watching from the trees, upright canines stalking rural communities, and Sasquatch encounters that defy conventional explanation. Now, some witnesses describe sightings lasting only a few seconds. Others report missing time, unexplained physical marks, electrical disturbances, strange odors, or an overwhelming sense that something was watching them. Now, tonight, we will examine 8 disturbing accounts from across Washington state. These reports involve UFOs, possible abduction phenomena, flying cryptids, cloaked humanoids, upright canines, Sasquatch, military secrecy, and just one disturbance that continues to haunt me personally. These are stories of unexplained Washington. Now, this first account comes from a witness who grew up in a large rural property near Beacon Rock in Washington state. The witness was approximately 10 years old and already comfortable spending long periods alone in the woods. He knew the surrounding property well and frequently camped with his dogs. Now, his experience began one night while he was standing on the front porch looking out across the pasture. Now, at first, he believed he was looking at the full moon, but the light continued growing larger. It moved slowly from left to right above the tree line. And realizing that the object was not the moon, the boy turned and ran inside to get his older brother. When they returned to the porch, the light had vanished. Now, his brother assumed he had been playing a joke and punched him in the arm. But approximately 1 week later, the boy decided to camp in the woods. The family owned several hundred acres, surrounded by dense forest. He walked for about an hour with his Walker coon dog, Buddy, and an Australian shepherd before finding a clearing beside a small creek. He carried a 22 caliber rifle and began preparing the campsite as darkness approached. Now, while he was attempting to start a fire, both dogs began behaving strangely. Buddy started baying loudly. That was the last thing the witness clearly remembered. The next moment he could recall, he was inside his tent. It was early morning before the birds had begun calling. The tent flap was partially open and the campfire was completely extinguished. Buddy was gone. The Australian shepherd stood outside the tent whining. The boy immediately felt that something was terribly wrong. He became nauseous and vomited inside the tent. Although he was still fully dressed, he discovered that his boots had been placed on the wrong feet. When he removed them, he noticed that his socks were wet. The witness had spent much of his childhood in these woods. The environment was familiar to him, but he had never been frightened there before. But that morning, he experienced a level of fear he had never known. He grabbed his rifle, abandoned the tent and the rest of his equipment, and ran toward home with the Australian shepherd beside him. They did not stop until they reached the family pasture. His mother was waiting for him. She grabbed him and began crying. His father and brothers were already searching the property because the boy had not returned when expected. His mother then told him something disturbing. Buddy had returned to the farmhouse alone at approximately 11 o'clock the previous night. The dog had been baying and appeared distressed. Buddy had never voluntarily left the boy's side. The dog's return indicated that something unusual had happened at the campsite many hours before the witness regained awareness. So several days later, the boy noticed two small red puncture marks on his right ankle. They resembled tiny snake bites. He then discovered an identical pair of marks on the same position on his left ankle. The marks immediately reminded him of the time he had lost in the woods. There was one additional event. On another night, his mother found him outside near the family mailbox at approximately 10 o'clock. He appeared to be sleepwalking, but no one understood how he had left the house without being noticed. Now, the witness still does not know what happened in the forest. He remembers the strange light of the tree line and dogs reacting and then awakening hours later with his boots reversed, wet socks, nauseous, unexplained punctures, and no memory of intervening time. Was this a childhood misadventure followed by confusion and fear? Or did the light over Beacon Rock mark the beginning of something that followed the witness into the woods? Now, missing time cases are especially difficult to investigate because the most important portion of the experience is absent from the witness's conscious memory. We are left with the moments before and after unusual lights, disturbed animals, physical illness, misplaced clothing, unexplained marks, and a powerful instinct that something occurred. Now, our next witnesses remained conscious throughout their encounter. What they saw was enormous, silent, and almost completely transparent. So in July 1997, a married couple was outside their husband's parents' home in Bremerton, Washington. It was a warm summer night at approximately 10 o'clock. And as the couple looked toward the evergreen tree line, two enormous shapes glided into the moonlight. The witnesses initially struggled to understand what they were seeing. The objects were not conventional aircraft. They appeared to be living creatures. Each had a wingspan comparable to that of a small Cessna airplane. Their heads resembled those of historic birds with long pterodactyl-like beaks. Their bodies and wings reminded the witness of stingrays. There were no visible feathers. The creatures also appeared to possess feet and long, prehistoric-looking tails. But their most remarkable characteristic was their transparency. The witnesses could clearly see their outlines when the moonlight fell on them, yet the creatures appeared almost colorless. Their surfaces reflected the surrounding environment like glass beneath water. The witness compared them to Wonder Woman's invisible airplane, clearly present but visible only because of the way light bent and reflected along their form. The creatures made no sound. There was no wing flapping, mechanical noise, or rush of displaced air. They appeared to glide or swim through the atmosphere. One of them descended to approximately 10 feet above the witness's head. It passed so close that they believed they could have touched it if they had climbed onto the father's truck. The creature continued towards the neighboring house and appeared for a moment as though it might collide with the structure. But instead, it abruptly changed direction, glided down the street, and disappeared into the darkness. The second creature followed. The couple did not feel directly threatened. The beings did not appear to be hunting or stalking them. They seemed to be passing through the area. And when the witnesses told their family what they had seen, no one believed them. The woman later admitted that she might have believed her husband either, but she did not witness the creatures herself. She had considered several possible explanations. Could they have been a prehistoric animal somehow surviving into the modern era? Were they spiritual manifestations? Could two separate realities or dimensions have briefly overlapped, allowing the witness to see something that normally existed beyond human perception? The description resembles reports of so-called flying rays, enormous airborne forms that move silently, have broad membranous bodies, and are sometimes seen near large bodies of water. Washington State also has a history of alleged pterosaur-like sightings, but Bremerton creatures did not appear entirely silent. Their transparency, silence, reflective surfaces, and proximity to the water suggest that the witnesses may have observed something more unusual than an undiscovered biological animal. Were these flesh and blood creatures possessing an extraordinary form of natural camouflage? Were they something cloaked? Or did the witnesses glimpse life moving through a neighboring reality? Now, the Bremerton witnesses described enormous creatures that seemed partially removed from physical world. But our next case contains a similar characteristics. The beings were humanoid rather than airborne, but they also appeared distorted, translucent, or incompletely visible. Unlike the creatures of Bremerton, these entities were encountered deep within Washington forest. Now, several friends were camping near Table Mountain in Washington State during December. The weather was cold, and the group had established a campsite near a river. Now, earlier that day, two members of the group had completed a difficult hike while the other two remained behind to gather firewood and prepare the camp. When the hikers returned, one of them thought he saw a man standing near the group's equipment. The person appeared to be wearing a gray t-shirt despite the winter temperatures. The figure disappeared before the witness could obtain a clear look. Now, the two witnesses who had remained at the campsite later reported that they had repeatedly heard footsteps moving around their tent. Now, the sounds had been so frequent and so close that they assumed the hikers had returned and were walking around outside. But no one had announced the presence or entered the camp. And as evening approached, the group began cooking dinner. They heard movement around the campsite, and at times it sounded like heavy boots sloshing through the nearby river. One witness also heard what he described as faint drumming. Now, although one group member became nervous, the primary witness initially treated the situation as a joke. He repeatedly shone his flashlight into the woods and pretended to see something in order to frighten his friends. Then, on the third or fourth attempt, he actually saw something. Between two trees was a gray human-shaped figure crouched close to the ground. Its limbs were unusually long. The figure began to rise. Its head was large and gray, with two visible eyes, but no other obvious facial features. The witness recalled that the being appeared to move or to support itself using its elbows in an unnatural manner. Then it vanished. The other campers noticed an immediate change in their friend. They said he performed a double take, lost color in his face, sat down, and repeatedly insisted that he had seen a deer. But the witness knew that was not true. He saw deer regularly where he lived. The figure he observed did not resemble one. And over the next hour, the group continued to hear movement around the campsite. A rotten egg odor drifted through the area and was later detected inside the tent. The odor could have had a natural origin, but when considered alongside the footsteps, the earlier sighting of a lightly dressed man, and the drumming sounds in a gray humanoid, the atmosphere of the campsite became increasingly disturbing. The witness said he was not immediately terrified. Instead, he was confused. His mind reached for the quickest rational explanation available, and he attempted to convince himself that he had seen a deer. But he had not seen a deer. He had seen a long-limbed, gray humanoid crouched between two trees. Now, the Table Mountain figure was visible only briefly before disappearing. Was it a physical being that escaped into the darkness, or did it possess some ability to conceal itself? Now, our next witness saw something that appeared to be present and absent simultaneously. Its outline was visible, but its body resembled rippling air. The emotional effect it produced was immediate and overwhelming. So, in early August 2016, a man named Ben was guarding a rural Washington property that he had become which had become a gathering place for trespassers, squatters, and drug users. Some of the individuals entering the property were known to be violent. Because of the risk, Ben carried a rifle while patrolling the heavily wooded grounds. So one evening, he experienced a sudden urge to stop beneath a large old cedar tree. He set down his rifle and day pack, leaned against the trunk, and closed his eyes. Almost immediately, Ben entered in an unusually peaceful state. The stress and tension associated with guarding the property just disappeared. He felt calm, centered, and completely safe. He later described the experience as almost zen-like. And after sitting beneath the tree for some time, Ben opened his eyes. He looked toward an alder grove to his right. Approximately 15 feet above the ground, he saw the outline of a humanoid figure. But the being did not appear solid. It resembled rippling air or a cloaking effect depicted in the Predator movies. Ben could distinguish the shapes of the head, neck, and shoulders, but the rest of the figure seemed to dissolve into distortion. It was as though only a portion of the being was visible within normal reality. The moment Ben focused on it, the peaceful atmosphere disappeared. A wave of dread overwhelmed him. This was not ordinary fear. The sensation struck at such a deep instinctive level that Ben became convinced any movement might provoke the entity. He remained frozen beneath the tree. Attempting to determine whether his vision was playing tricks on him, Ben removed his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and put them back on. The figure remained in exactly the same position. Ben then decided that he needed to leave. He silently counted backward from 5, and when he reached 0, he grabbed his rifle and equipment and ran toward home as quickly as possible. Nothing visibly pursued him. The entity did not appear near the house, but the encounter remained in his thoughts. A friend familiar with European folklore suggested that Ben may have encountered a forest wit or territorial guardian associated with the land. Others advised him to return with an offering. Ben avoided the cedar for several weeks, and then in September 2016, he returned to photograph the location and leave food and water. And as he approached the tree, the feeling of dread returned, though it was less intense than during the original encounter. He did not see the cloaked figure, but he strongly sensed that something was still present. Ben placed the offering on the ground. The atmosphere changed. He no longer felt threatened. He spoke aloud, explaining that he was only attempting to protect the property. He also firmly stated that nothing present on the land had permission to follow him home. Around the same period, Ben discovered a sharply defined L-shaped hole approximately 75 feet from the cedar. The opening did not resemble the work of a familiar burrowing animal, and during a later visit, he found 2 long gashes in the earth near the hole. Each was approximately 2 feet long and about the width of a human foot. The marks looked as though something had driven a heel or narrow edge into the soil and dragged it with considerable force. There is no way to determine whether ground disturbances were connected to the cloaked figure, but the combination of the visible distortion, the dramatic emotional shift, and repeated sensation of the presence and the unexplained marks suggested that Ben might have encountered something more substantial than a momentary visual illusion. Now, was the entity responsible for a strange sense of peace that drew him beneath the cedar? Was the dread a warning to leave? Was Ben observing a cloaked biological creature, an interdimensional presence, or something traditionally associated with the land itself? Now, Ben interrupted the presence as territorial rather than openly predatory. Once he stated his intentions and left an offering, the threatening atmosphere seemed to subside. But the next witness was not given that sense of reconciliation. What he encountered outside a gas station appeared animal-like at first, but then it stood upright. Now, this account was related by a friend of the original witness. In 1992, the witness worked the graveyard shift at a gas station in Grayland, Washington. He usually worked from 11 o'clock at night until 7 in the morning. Business was slow during those hours, and he passed the time watching television or reading magazines between customers. Now, the witness was of Native heritage and had grown up within the Pacific Northwest coastal community where traditional beliefs, ancestral stories, and the warnings about supernatural beings remained important. He was also an imposing man, standing approximately 6 feet 10 inches tall. And despite his appearance, his friends described him as a gentle and good natured. One night, a customer entered the station, paid for gasoline, cigarettes, and a drink, and returned to his vehicle. And as the witness looked through the window toward the customer's car, he noticed what appeared to be an enormous dog sitting near the edge of the woods. Powerful lights beneath the gas station canopy illuminated portions of the property, but created deep shadows beyond the pumps. Now, the witness attempted to focus on the animal, but then it was gone. He dismissed the sighting. Even if the animal had been a wolf, he would have been safely inside the station. Then several hours passed without another customer. The witness was preparing to refill condiments when he heard a loud thud from behind the building. The sound appeared to come from the area where the dumpsters were located. Homeless individuals had previously searched through the station's garbage, and the witness initially assumed someone was scavenging, but he ignored it. The noises continued and became louder. Eventually, the witness decided to confront whatever was behind the building, or whoever was behind the building. He took a flashlight and a firearm from the office, exited through the front door, and walked around the side of the station. And when he reached the corner, he directed the flashlight beam toward the dumpsters. The light struck an enormous animal rummaging through the garbage. It was the same creature he had seen near the woods, but it was not an ordinary dog. The creature stood upright on its hind legs. It reached approximately to the same height as the witness, nearly 7 feet tall. Its body was too narrow and gaunt to be a bear. Its shape appeared canine, but its proportions were disturbingly human-like. His eyes reflected the flashlight beam. The sight was so shocking that the witness dropped both the flashlight and the gun. He ran back into the station, locked the doors, and remained inside for the rest of the night. The creature did not visibly follow him. The witness resigned from the job the following day. He later became convinced that the creature had been a shape-shifting entity associated with Native traditions. Now, whether that interpretation was cultural or geographically accurate is impossible to determine. What remains important is that the witness description of a massive canine creature that first appeared on 4 legs and was later seen upright at nearly 7 feet tall was an unidentified bear, an unusually large wolf, an upright canine similar to creature reported throughout in North America? Or was it something rooted in traditional warnings the witness had heard throughout his life? Now, the Grayland witness encountered a creature that seemed to exist somewhere between human and the animal worlds. But our next report also involves an entity that resisted every classification. This time, however, the witness observed not one unexplained creature, but 2. What followed was a violent confrontation between Sasquatch and a translucent, reptilian-looking being in the woods near Kirkland. Now, a witness was hiking in the woods near Kirkland, Washington, when he noticed something unusual climbing a tree. Now, at first, he believed it was a giant white lizard. And as he continued watching, he realized that the creature was partially translucent. Its body appeared almost skeletal or exoskeletal, with the tail and several short, stubby appendages. The creature turned its head backward and looked directly at the witness. It made a snapping sound with its huge mouth. Its face possessed jagged bumps along the upper and lower edges. The witness could not determine whether these projections for teeth are part of the creature's facial structures. Then he heard a whooping noise coming from a surrounding forest. Something large came crashing through the brush. The translucent creature stopped climbing and turned its head toward the sound. The massive blackish-brown bipedal creature emerged from the vegetation. The witness identified it as a Sasquatch. He had previously observed a Sasquatch in 2003, though this individual looked different. The Sasquatch moved around the tree and grabbed the white creature. The smaller being immediately fought back. It whipped its tail against the Sasquatch's arm and released a loud shrieking sound. Then it leaped onto the much larger creature. Now, although Sasquatch appeared approximately 4 times its size, the white being attacked with extraordinary aggression. It crawled over the Sasquatch's body and repeatedly leaned in as though biting it. Each time it made contact, smoke appeared to rise from the Sasquatch's fur or skin. The Sasquatch screamed in pain. The witness believed the smaller creature might have been producing venom, acid, or some other caustic substance. He did not see liquid being projected, but something appeared to burn the Sasquatch whenever the white creature bit or pressed against it. After struggling for some time, the Sasquatch seized the creature by the head and pulled it away. The white being flipped forward. Its head then appeared to rotate completely around. It bit the Sasquatch's arm. The Sasquatch threw the creature against the tree and stuck it with tremendous force. Instead of being crushed, the white being flattened and spread across the trunk like a fried egg. The witness believed the creature had deliberately changed or elongated its shape to absorb the impact. Then it sprang toward another tree. The Sasquatch followed and attempted to strike it with a large stick. Now, eventually, the white creature fell from the tree and ran into the forest. Sasquatch pursued it. The witness never understood why the Sasquatch appeared so determined to capture or kill this translucent creature. Was the white being prey? Was it a predator invading the Sasquatch's territory? Could the substance it produced have responded to the natural defense mechanism? Or had the creature observed a confrontation between 2 beings that remain undocumented by conventional science? This report is extraordinary, even by cryptid standards, but it contains details found in other unexplained encounters, including translucent skin, strange body movement, unusual vocalizations, chemical or burning effects, and a Sasquatch apparently defending a territory from another unknown creature. Now, this Kirkland report suggests the possibility that Washington's forest may contain more than one type of unidentified being. And it also raises a disturbing question. If such creatures exist, would government or military authorities already know about them? Now, our next witness believes he may have participated in an operation connected to that very possibility. The assignment began as a military training exercise. It ended with armed guards protecting heavily concealed creatures near the devastation of Mount St. Helens. In 1980, a United States Air Force serviceman was stationed at George Air Force Base near Victorville, California. He worked in aircraft maintenance in support of the Air Force's Wild Weasel mission involved F-4 aircraft. That year, he and other personnel were sent to train with Canadian forces at Canadian Force Base COMEX on Vancouver Island. Now, the group departed George Air Force Base aboard a C-141 transport aircraft. And during the flight, the aircraft experienced an emergency involving the loss of hydraulic fluid in one of the engines. The servicemen watched a crew chief repeatedly pour fluid into the reservoir only to see that the level fall back to zero. The crewman wore a parachute. The passengers did not. And after landing at Travis Air Force Base for repairs, the flight eventually continued north. The aircraft passed over Mount St. Helens shortly after the volcano had erupted. When the group arrived at COMEX, their officer informed them that the deployment would last longer than the planned 2 weeks. They were needed for an emergency mission. For several days, the airmen were given little information and had almost nothing to do. Then, one night, they were ordered onto a bus. The bus carried them toward the southern end of Vancouver Island, where the vehicle was loaded onto an unusual Navy ferry. The bus was transported across the water to the United States side, and after embarking, they continued driving through the darkness, rain, and heavy cloud cover. Eventually, they arrived at what appeared to be a disaster area. The airmen were issued M16 rifles with 1 magazine each. This immediately struck the witness as unusual. Most enlisted Air Force personnel handle rifles during basic training, but they rarely assigned armed perimeter duty. They were also issued plain green fatigues and poorly fitted helmets marked with the word guard. The briefing provided few details. The men were told to protect designated access points inside a tented military area. They were to inspect credentials and allow only authorized personnel to enter. They were also told that anyone attempting to breach the perimeter was to be shot. Approximately 30 airmen were involved. None of them clearly knew where they were. There were no obvious towns or cities nearby. The location appeared isolated and close to land affected by the volcanic eruption. The personnel lived and worked inside a restricted area covering approximately 1 acre. There were sleeping tents, a mess tent, several larger secured structures. The airmen worked 12-hour night shifts. The guarded tents were constructed with partitions and entrance foyers that prevented anyone standing outside from seeing into the main interior areas. Bright lighting was visible beyond the partitions, but the arrangement seemed deliberately designed to conceal whatever had happened inside. Now, the official explanation was that they were guarding victims of the Mount St. Helens eruption. Medical personnel occasionally passed through the checkpoints. A person dressed like a doctor in a white laboratory coat would escort a heavily bundled individual by the arm. Now, the escorted figures wore thick coats and dark knit hats. Their hands were also concealed. The guards were never given a clear view of their faces. The escort would provide a surname, show credentials, and proceed into or out of the restricted area. There were no disturbances. No one attempted to breach the perimeter. Nothing occurred that seemed to justify the armed security or the order to use lethal force. Now, near the end of the assignment, however, the witness noticed something they could never forget. 2 of the bundled individuals were extraordinarily tall. They stood more than a full head above the medical personnel escorting them. They were also unusually broad across the shoulders and torso. At the time, the witnesses assumed the bulk was due to the heavy coats and cold weather. After approximately 8 or 9 days, the airmen were debriefed. They were told that they had guarded victims of the eruption and were ordered not to discuss that portion of the mission. They were allowed to shower and were given their original Air Force uniforms back in a separate tent behind the latrines. The group boarded the same bus, traveled the darkness to the ferry, crossed back to Vancouver Island, and returned to Comex. Now, the remainder of the deployment continued normally. They trained with the Canadians, flew additional sorties, and eventually returned to George Air Force Base. The witness did not seriously question the incident until years later when he began reading reports about Sasquatch activity associated with the Mount St. Helens eruption. He then began to wonder whether the extraordinarily tall and broad individuals had truly been victims of human disaster. Perhaps they were severely injured people whose identities and conditions required privacy. But if that was the case, why did Air Force maintenance specialists use Air Force maintenance specialists as armed guards? Why conceal the patient's face and hands? Why transport the guards secretly by bus and military ferry? Why issue orders to shoot anyone attempting to cross the perimeter? Now, the witness stated this was the only time during his entire Air Force service, other than basic training, where he was assigned armed perimeter duty. He still does not know exactly what he was protecting. Now, the Mount St. Helens account involves secrecy, military authority, and concealed figures whose physical proportions just seem abnormal. The witness was given orders, but no answers. Our final report contains no military installation, guarded perimeter, or official explanation. It began at an isolated farmhouse with strange lights over the Coeur d'Alene Mountains. And for a young school teacher named Mandy, these lights marked the beginning of terror. Within weeks, she would disappear. Now, this final case remains one of the most disturbing and emotional investigations I have ever been involved with. In July 2009, I received a call from a young school teacher named Mandy who lived with her mother in an isolated farmhouse in East Central Washington. Mandy told me that her life had become a living nightmare. She was terrified of the dark. She was afraid to leave the house at night. She believed that something beyond human understanding that had targeted her and her mother. The activity had begun approximately 2 weeks earlier. Mandy and her mother noticed unusual red and white lights hovering over the Coeur d'Alene Mountains near their farmhouse. That same night, Mandy experienced a violent dream involving flashing lights and mechanical sounds. She awakened nauseous, disoriented, and deeply frightened. Her mother initially dismissed the experiences as a nightmare, but then the lights returned. One evening, while Mandy and her mother were cleaning up after dinner, they heard sharp popping sounds outside the farmhouse. When they looked through the windows, they saw hundreds of red and white lights moving rapidly across the sky and over the property. Whenever two of the lights appeared to collide, a loud popping sound echoed through the yard. And at the same time, the telephone stopped working. The house lights began flickering. Scratching noises moved across the roof. Then, without warning, everything stopped. When Mandy stepped outside, she detected a faint odor resembling burnt motor oil. There was no visible evidence explaining what had happened. But the following night was worse. Heavy thuds struck the roof. Rapid scampering sounds came from the attic. A red and white lights again surrounded the farmhouse. This time, the electricity failed completely and remained off for nearly an hour. Mandy and her mother retreated to a bedroom where they sat together by candlelight. They felt like prisoners inside their own home. They could not use the telephone. They could not see what was moving above them. They did not know whether something was attempting to enter the house. And when Mandy contacted me, I could hear the terror in her voice. It was not exaggerated. It was not rehearsed. It was raw and sincere. She desperately wanted an explanation. Now, during our conversation, he asked me a question I will never forget. Why is this happening to us? Now, I instructed Mandy and her mother to maintain detailed journals and to contact me after every incident. We spoke late into that night. I believe they were generally frightened and that something seemed to be deliberately targeting them. That was the last real conversation I ever had with Mandy. Several days later, her mother called me. Her voice was broken with grief. Mandy was missing. The night after our conversation, Mandy had gone to bed as usual. And at approximately 11 o'clock, her mother noticed light shining from beneath Mandy's bedroom door. And when she opened the door, the light suddenly went out. Mandy was gone. Her car remained at the farmhouse. Her clothing, belongings, and personal items had not been disturbed. There was no known visitor. There was no obvious sign of forced entry. There was no explanation for how Mandy could have left the bedroom and farmhouse without her mother noticing. Police investigators reportedly considered the possibility she had left voluntarily and departed with someone during the night. But there was no evidence supporting either explanation. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. As of my last inquiry with the Washington authorities, Mandy's disappearance remained unsolved. And my last actual inquiry was about a year ago. No confirmed trace of her had ever been found. I remain convinced that Mandy was taken, though not necessarily by human hands. Now, her disappearance occurred after repeated aerial phenomena, telephone and electrical failures, unexplained sounds on the roof and in the attic, physical illness, and her growing conviction that an unknown intelligence had singled them out. And as investigators, we attempt to document facts, identify patterns, and separate evidence from speculation. But some cases become deeply personal. And when Mandy called me, she was not simply reporting strange lights. She was asking for reassurance. She wanted someone to tell her that she was not imagining these events. But more than anything, she wanted to believe that someone understood what was happening, could protect her. I couldn't give her that assurance. I often wonder whether Mandy knew that she was being targeted. Did she suspect that her time was running out? Her question still echoes in my mind. Why is this happening to us? Now, Mandy is more than a missing person in an unresolved file. She represents the human cost of encounters that exist beyond conventional explanations. Whatever occurred inside that isolated Washington farmhouse, a frightened young woman disappeared. The truth has never been uncovered. Mandy's disappearance remains one of the most disturbing and emotional cases that I personally have ever investigated. Now, the reports presented tonight come from different regions of Washington and involve very different forms of unexplained activity. A child near Beacon Rock saw an enormous light and later awakened in the forest after hours of missing time. A married couple in Bremerton watched two massive transparent creatures slide silently above their heads. Campers near Table Mountain hear footsteps, drumming, and movement before encountering a long-limbed gray humanoid. A property guard saw a cloaked figure suspended near an ancient cedar tree and experienced an overwhelming wave of dread. The gas station employee at Grayland confronted an enormous canine creature standing upright on two legs. A hiker near Kirkland reportedly witnessed a violent confrontation between a Sasquatch and a translucent reptilian being. An Air Force serviceman was secretly transported into a restricted disaster zone and ordered to guard heavily concealed figures whose size and proportions appeared abnormal. And Mandy disappeared from her bedroom after weeks of lights, electrical disturbances, scratching on the roof, and a growing conviction that something had chosen her. Now, are these reports connected? On the surface, they appear to describe completely different phenomena, but several patterns repeat. Many of the encounters occurred near forests, mountains, rivers, coastlines, or isolated rural properties. Several involved beings that appeared translucent, cloaked, reflective, or only partially present. Animals reacted before the witnesses understood that something was wrong. Witnesses reported strange odors, unusual sounds, missing time, physical marks, emotional manipulation, and sudden feeling of dread. In some cases, the entities appeared territorial. In others, they seemed curious, predatory, or focused on a particular individual. Washington's geography may provide ideal conditions for unusual animals to remain hidden. Its military facilities and restricted areas may conceal classified activity. In ancient forests and native traditions preserve accounts of beings that have occupied the region far longer than modern communities. But those explanations may account for only parts of the mystery. Perhaps one of these entities was not permanently present in the way humans understand physical existence. They may move between environments, dimensions, or states of visibility. They may appear only when conditions permit us to perceive them. Or perhaps they have always been here, observing from places where we rarely look. The witnesses in these cases did not begin their experiences expecting to encounter the impossible. Most were engaged in ordinary activities. They were camping, hiking, working, guarding property, completing a military assignment, or sitting inside their own home. Then the boundary between the known and the unknown suddenly opened. For a few moments, they saw something that changed their understanding of reality. For Mandy, that boundary may never have closed. Her case is a reminder that behind every unexplained report is a human being. There's fear, there's confusion, there's often ridicule and isolation, and sometimes there's loss. Whether we interpret these counts as cryptid encounters, UFO activity, spiritual manifestations, undiscovered biological organisms, dimensional intrusions, or something we have not yet learned to define, the witnesses deserve to be heard. Their experiences deserve to be documented. The question they raise should not be ignored simply because the answers make us uncomfortable. Washington remains one of the most geographically beautiful and mysterious regions in North America. Beyond its cities and highways lie immense forests, volcanic landscapes, isolated coastlines, and remote mountain corridors. Within those places, something unexplained continues to move. Perhaps it watches from the trees. Perhaps it slides silently above us. Perhaps it hides behind military barriers. Or perhaps it just waits outside the light. Now, thank you for joining me for the presentation on Unexplained Washington. Please subscribe to Phantoms and Monsters Radio, activate notifications, and share these presentations for others interested in the unexplained. If you have experienced something unexplained in Washington or elsewhere, I encourage you to document every detail you remember. Record the date, time, location, weather, direction of travel, duration of the event, physical characteristics, sounds, odors, lights, lighting conditions, emotional responses, and the names of any additional witnesses. Even details that initially seem insignificant may become important when compared with other reports. And you can submit your account to Phantoms and Monsters. Witness confidentiality and anonymity will be respected when requested. Your support helps us continue documenting witness testimony, investigating unusual incidents, and preserving these accounts for future research. So let's start the Q&A. Please type your question in all caps. Michelle, 54689. Do you think the cloaking of the figure initially had a hypnotic effect on the guard to make him more docile, like they possibly used for hunting to keep prey from running? That's a good question. I don't know. It could very possibly be that. When you get encounters like this, or even just general observations, it could be a lot of different things. But what you stated could be very true. Unless we get some type of documentation or affirmation of what happened, it's pretty hard to even make out exactly what had occurred. So, we do the best to investigate, but sometimes we just don't get the answer that we want. Paranormalism Net, Lon, what were you doing on the road? I wasn't investigating anything. I was just taking a couple days off. I needed some time off. Dagnammit, the Sasquatch has been spotted near Mount St. Helens, and sightings started after the 1980 eruption. Do you think Sasquatch could be Mothman? During our investigation in Chicagoland, we had a couple of sightings, particularly in Woodstock, Illinois, of a creature that looked like a Bigfoot. We even had sketches. It looked like a Bigfoot with large wings. Now, is that the same as the Sasquatch that originally started in La Crosse, Wisconsin, that was reported by Linda Godfrey? I don't know. Could it be related to the Mothman? Yeah, it could be. It could be another type of winged humanoid or winged cryptid. We just don't know. Though I did take the reports of these possible Sasquatches and put it alongside the winged humanoid reports in Chicago. I am aware of the so-called Sasquatch sightings in Washington, but I don't really know exactly what it was. If you want to use the characteristics of the well-known Mothman, it probably wasn't. But who's to say there's not other winged beings or winged humanoids out there that kind of fit that bill? The best I can say is that we just continue to look into it, and maybe we'll be able to connect it. Michelle, do you think some reptilians possibly do other acidic saliva, or could the bite just be toxic to Bigfoot, and because they are from different vibrations that cause that reaction? Well, of course, it's probably a defense mechanism, a natural defensive mechanism. Is if it's a creature that's not indigenous to the area. Well, maybe it was from another realm or another level to where it was used naturally to defend against other types of predators on their realm or on their plane. I don't know. Apparently, the Sasquatch was affected by it, but it didn't seem to permanently disable it. So, that's a tough one to answer. I mean, it's a very unusual report, and I received something very similar to that in Florida as well, but it was just a little bit different. So I don't know if these are ultra-terrestrial beings, or I doubt they're, other than the Sasquatch, I doubt that they were indigenous, and they were probably from another plane. Jose Sanchez, in the animal kingdom, size is considered dominance and strength. Might there also be a connection with that and a dogman species as their natural traits? It could be. It could be. We hear all sizes, colors, types of cryptid canines. Some are huge. I mean, we have had reports here in Pennsylvania of what we call lichens that appear just like in the, if you're familiar with the Underworld series of films, where the lichens are huge 10-foot creatures that resemble werewolves. If that's something that's factual, yeah, we've had reports of that. But, it just represents another facet of this whole cryptid canine phenomena. So, anything like that, you kind of take with a grain of salt until you get more and more evidence, put it together, and maybe we'll find something. But honestly, first of all, it's not something I want to come across. And many times when we have had witnesses report these beings, it shakes them up pretty bad. So it seems like they're really encountering something. Now, is it an illusion? Is it a manifestation of some kind? Is it some type of time slip that manifests somehow? I don't know. We just don't really know. Race fan, I heard that there were multiple dead Bigfoot that were airlifted out of Mount St. Helens, and a live one came to a military headquarters and was treated by a vet. Yeah, that's a pretty well known story. That was that was similar to this event. And I'm pretty sure these were different events. I mean, though I don't really know that. I have heard other accounts that kind of coincide with this one I talked about, where these beings were injured, but they were docile enough that they didn't have to secure them or anything, and took them in for treatment. What happened to them afterwards, I have no idea. The whole Mount St. Helens mystery is just that, a mystery. And, we have had a lot of different reports, a lot of different things that we just don't really have any explanation for. But there are some people within the field that believe that something like that actually did happen. So, of course, the military isn't saying a word. So, it's just like any other type of disclosure. Until we start getting evidence and start getting some explanation, we just take it for what it's worth and try to make determinations with the evidence that we've received. Lala Bright, Lon, what detail in the Mothman reports is most often overlooked but may actually be key to understanding the phenomena? Well, the fact that they show up the way they do, suddenly show up, suddenly manifest. Many times people see them come through like they're coming through an invisible doorway, and vice versa, that they vanish within a visible doorway. And we've had this before. I mean, not just in the Chicagoland area. We've had other sightings very similar to that. And then there's been variations. But the confounding part is many times we don't see them feeding or doing things that they would do to remain on this plane as viable creatures that are indigenous to the area. Many times they see them in a brief moment, and there's nothing to indicate that they are part of our Earth plane. I never really got that indication with the 180 odd reports that we thought were authentic in the Chicagoland area that seemed to indicate that these beings were living among us. They were appearing among us, but I doubt they were living among us. Lala Bright, Lon, what is the most frightening detail that consistently appears in Bigfoot reports but rarely gets discussed publicly? I would say the fact that many times when a Bigfoot is in an area and they notice a human being looking at it, and they react like that they shouldn't be being seen. In other words, they react like this human is looking at me and it shouldn't be seeing me. Now, there have been theories about these beings being cloaked. This whole Glimmerman phenomena. Some people do believe that these Bigfoot or other cryptid creatures or even humanoids, some type of ultra-terrestrial. Again, I go back to Chicago with the winged humanoids. Many times these things, they acted like they want to be seen, but they seem to only allow certain people to actually look at it or to recognize it. We've had reports among hundreds of people where only one or two people possibly saw it or even reacted to it. As far as Bigfoot and Sasquatch, the same thing happens, but it's somewhat different. I mean, they seem to think that they can't be seen because they're using some type of either mechanism or some type of ability to cloak themselves. But when they see the person looking at them and staring at them, they realize that they are being seen. And when that happens, they quickly disappear. I mean, they get through somewhere where they can't be followed or seen anymore. Do they travel through a portal? Are they able to distinguish a portal and go through it? That we don't know. But I have talked to investigators, well-known investigators, that literally followed these beings very closely, the best they could, and the thing would just disappear where there was nothing there, rocks or any type of hiding place for it to go. So, yeah, I think that's a bit scary. So, we don't have many attacks. Even most cryptids don't attack humans. I think they try to avoid humans as much as they possibly can. Lala Bright, Lon, have you ever investigated a dogman case where the creature's actions appear deliberately psychological rather than predatory? There have been cases where, let's say, a hunter would walk up to one of these beings, not recognizing it, then all of a sudden just be able to see it standing there, holding its ground, and then communicating somehow with it, some type of abilities to let the human know to just back the hell up, lower the weapon, and get out of here. And we have had that happen, particularly in Pennsylvania, up in the north central part of the state. It happens in other parts as well, but yeah, it's very much like what a Sasquatch apparently does with the mind speak type of thing. So yeah, I don't think any of these beings are predatory. I think they come through somewhere from somehow or somewhere where they just pop in. I mean, we had people walking on trails, and one in particular in Pennsylvania where one guy was walking his two dogs. He was out in the middle of a game land, and this cryptid canine, upright cryptid canine, just suddenly manifested and walked swiftly to the woods like there was nothing, there was nothing going on. He had no realization of anything around it. And the dogs are barking like crazy and acting up. It never acknowledged that. So, I mean, could this be a glimpse into another dimension? It's possible. But these type of encounters do happen. Michelle, I'm so sorry about the girl you were trying to help disappearing. Has there been any updates or any new leads as to what or who took her? No, there had. And I've been checking. I mean, this happened, in 2009. So that's 17 years ago? It doesn't seem that long, but it's been that long. And I have checked. Now, the mother had died 3 years after the event. She probably died of a broken heart more than anything else. I had no indication that she was sick. But she continued to look for her daughter. And after the mother died, the property went into escrow, and eventually Mandy was declared deceased, and the property and any funds were distributed among family. But still, Washington State has no record of credit cards or sightings or anything associated with Mandy whatsoever. They're somewhat tight-lipped about it, especially as time has gone on. The file is still there. I've been told not to disclose the file number. For some reason, they don't want it getting out. I don't know. And I don't know if I'd even do it. I mean, out of respect for her and her mother, I don't think I'd ever disclose any of that. Okay, folks. Well, I want to thank you for showing up tonight. So until the next time, just remain observant, trust your instincts, and remember that the world around us may be far stranger than we've been led to believe. So until the next time we meet, stay aware, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the strangest places are just not that far away. So have a nice evening. Have a great weekend. See you next Friday. Good night.